Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show issue number 74.
Boom!
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
Welcome, everybody, to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show issue 74. Oh, and I love when we got these little surprises for people out there. But before we get into that and hear Steve's point of view, we got Niall that's going to tell us what to do. Woo! Go ahead, Niall.
All right, everyone, you know the rules. Look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we upload some great new episodes and we enjoy some live content like we're doing right now. And gentlemen, I'm excited. You know, so many mediums we could talk about, you know, things we've grown up that we loved. I just feel like we're going to be wrestling with each other on these matters, you know? So what do we have in store, gentlemen?
Oh, come on. Once again, we are we give pop culture to the crowds, right? I was trying to say, conduits of pop culture, right? That's what I was trying to say. We're conduits of pop culture.
Contouring the minds.
Conduits. Well, listen, a lot of pro wrestling, my head bouncing off those mattresses when I was
a lot of damage, but you're still
a lot of damage. But we love to throw in little surprises. And all the time, as we know, as we said before, we had some other guests on here before that were in the pro wrestling ring. But because pro wrestling also has a lot to do with comic books. I mean, I think there's so much. Those were real life superheroes and villains come to life. There's no characters extraordinaires. They just were. They could come right out of the printed page, and we've all grown up with them. And during, especially me and you, Steve, we've come through the golden age, which was basically 1982 to 1992, when that decade when a lot of those stars, and then there was also other eras. But Steve, what can you tell us about pro wrestling? And Steve, you wanted to be a pro wrestler. I love it. Well, you got the big body, 285 pounds, 6'4". Come on, tell us what's going on.
Yeah. Again, this show is going to surprise a lot of people because some people may not be aware of the connections between comics and wrestling. And when I first started going to gyms, when I was younger, and I would wear a comic t-shirt, the biggest guy in the gym would be like, yeah, man, I read that. Hardcore, man. And I'm like, whoa, wow, this huge guy speaking to me. You know, because when we're kids, we live vicariously through children's power trips. We are outside. We're either jumping off the roof, we're lifting imaginary rocks, or we're lifting our friends up and dropping them. Okay? And so people can start off reading those comics. And then once they get to a certain age, they may find themselves in a situation where they went to school, they became a wrestler or whatever it is. And then they get to the point where they get to a wrestling environment and they want to build characters, they want to build costumes. What's their inspiration? Boom! They've got all that stuff in their head. So today is going to be a fascinating trip, especially for those people who are unaware, okay, that wrestling and comics are so intertwined. We're going to showcase a little bit of that today.
Absolutely. And I just got to throw this in there. When you're talking about imaginary rocks, I used to work for this pasta place. They used to make like the real pasta. It was like a takeout, but very old fashioned, and they would make their own pasta and all that. But I used to have to go downstairs in the cellar, and I would have to get like the big buckets of flour and all that, those heavy like totes. And I would go down there and I would start punching the totes and wrestling. And then I would put the tote on my book and then I would press it, pumping and pressing him like Golden Soul used to say. I used to be Road Warrior Hawk. You know how crazy I was with the Road Warriors back here. But I used to fight those big things of flour and I would press them. And one time I tried to put I was like 105 pounds. I put 2 of them on there and I did it and I split one of them. I just threw it to the side and just went back upstairs. But I had wrestling was so, you know how obsessed I was with the Road Warriors. It was so in my head. But collecting comics and being crazy about comics at that time, I also collected the wrestling magazines. We would go to, like when you go to those newsstands, we would go, you go on the racks and you get the comic books. And then I would always peep at the wrestling magazines because they were like kind of close to the comics, wrestling magazines, and the porn. It's all kind of in the same.
Me and Niall never saw any of the porn.
What is this porn you speak of? Were there lady wrists?
But I tell you, those covers used to captivate me because they inspired me like the comic books. And little do we know, the guy that we have on here today was one of the basis of all those wrestling magazines, and he was a comic fan. Believe it or not, that it blew my mind that he actually was influenced by the greats, the Kirbys, the John Buscema's, all those great covers that we obsess over and talk over. He actually was inspired by those to make these covers, and the connection was almost in. Once again, it did not surprise me because they were so impactful to me, seeing those covers and all that stuff. So this guy right here, there was two names during all those great wrestling magazines, not including the WWF ones. Those were kind of passé because we loved our Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Sports Review Wrestling, The Wrestler, Wrestling 85 or whatever year it was. Those were the great. And this guy right here, there was 2 names synonymous with those magazines, Bill Apter and Craig Peters. And what's interesting is Bill Apter comic fans out there would know Bill Apter. He would probably be Stan Lee of the wrestling magazine field, and Craig Peters would be a Roy Thomas because he was basically like Bill's protege, and they were just in sync with putting out this magic that captured my imagination and seriously a million other kids. So without further ado, we got one of those legends here. A great guy, comic book fan, and wow, what an eye for detail, Mr. Craig Peters. Come on out, Craig. Ding, 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 ding.
Hey, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. What a great topic. I love this. The intersection of comics and wrestling. I lived this for the first, holy mackerel, I don't know, 35 years of my life. So great topic.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me in to talk about it.
That was very interesting. Yeah, thank you. Craig, I have to say, when I talked to Bill a few times, I knew he was a big wrestling fan. But when he told me to talk to you, you were a lot deeper because you were not just a wrestling fan, you were a comic book fan. And that was huge. While Bill was doing his shit on vaudeville, right. You were reading comic books.
Exactly right.
Bill.
I was really not a wrestling fan growing up. I became a wrestling fan by virtue of working for the wrestling magazines. But I was a comic fan growing up, and I bought everything. I had everything. I don't have the collection anymore. I've got 2 little short boxes in my basement, but common story. We all know how that goes. I actually sold a lot of it off in college to get a good stereo system. But boy, I wish I had it today because everything published between probably 66 and 72 or 73. Ooh. I need everything. Marvel, DC, Charlton, Atlas. I mean, I had them all. The comics, the magazines, all the fanzines. Just great. It was a great time to be a comic fan.
Where did you grow up, Craig?
I grew up on Long Island.
So right in the heart, right in the heart.
Yep, transplanted Long Islander, living in the Philly suburbs right now. I used to have an accent like yours, John. I lost it after a couple decades in the Philly area. But yeah, I mean, I grew up, and I remember the very first comic book I ever received. My folks used to put them in my Christmas stocking every year, and they throw in
Oh.
Archies and things like that. But the very first one that was like a non-kiddie comic was a Thunder Agents comic.
Oh.
And Wally Wood, yeah, and I still have it. I still have it. I still have that comic. But later on, what really grabbed my attention, my brother was into comics and underground comics, and he was really sort of plugged into the culture at the time. He's 10 years older than me. So he comes in and he gives me, it was Marvel, I think it was Marvel Superheroes with Captain Marvel.
Wow.
On the cover.
Yes.
The first Captain Marvel, right? And then I got the first Silver Surfer, and Silver Surfer just blew my mind. Still to this day, one of my favorites.
Oh.
And that just set off the switch, and I went crazy. I bought everything, and just loved it all.
Now, did you get entrapped like into the whole Stan Lee stuff when you're reading those comics? Did you? Because especially those Silver Surfers, how influential.
Oh yeah, well. I knew the names, and it's interesting how the comics and the hobby has changed over the years. But I was very artist driven, so yeah. I mean, I kept an eye. I knew all the names: Stan Lee, Roy Thomas, John Buscema, the whole bit. Jack Kirby, absolutely loved him. Jim Steranko, the stuff that he did on S.H.I.E.L.D., the stuff that he did for Captain America, fantastic. I was very artist driven. Jim Starlin, loved his work. Barry Smith, just how he made the transition from being sort of a Kirby copycat to his own mind-blowing thing. His work on Conan with Roy, holy mackerel, just beyond belief. Yeah, and I went to the conventions. I went to the Phil Sulin conventions.
Oh, did you?
I think it was the Statler Hilton, I think, had the right across the street from Penn Station. I went to the EC convention in '72. To this day, I'm a huge fan of EC comics. And I assume you guys in your audience are very familiar with those.
Oh, yeah.
Comics, wrestling, music is a big thing of mine. And I'm actually the proud owner of 3 EC comics that were from Jerry Garcia's collection. So sort of nice crossover between comics and music.
It just shows you the power of the, they weren't just these drawings and paper. These these things has inspired just the power of that medium. Like, and what's sad is a lot of those people in the industry didn't know. They were just getting paid and told to be in a corner, and they just didn't know cranking it out, and didn't know just how much they were inspiring kids like us, but especially you being in the heart of New York and around Madison Square Garden too, where you're hearing the rumblings of probably Bruno Sammartino and stuff going on.
Yeah, exactly. And I also went to what was it? It was at Radio City Music Hall, an evening with Stan Lee.
You went to that?
Really? I went to that. Yep. And Herb Trimpe came out, and he had like the overhead projector, and he was drawing the Hulk on the little thing, and it's showing up on the screen. I don't remember a whole lot from it. I think I still have one of the flyers, but yeah, I was there.
All right, hold on. Oh my God. Okay, they weren't allowed. They weren't allowed. They were not allowed to take pictures in there. I think his name was Rob Schneider, who was the promoter. But let me ask you a question. Do you remember a guy in a Spider-Man costume running up and down the aisle?
I can't say I do, but I can't say I don't. It sounds vaguely familiar, but yeah.
That was Roy Thomas. That was Roy Thomas in the Spider-Man costume running up and down the aisles. Fantastic. That is incredible. I never spoke to anybody that has ever been to that.
Yep.
Go ahead, Steve.
That's how hardcore I was. Yeah, so that gives you a good idea.
That blew my mind. Wow.
Well, it's really funny how, a lot of the stuff you're saying, it hits home here because, unlike John Cimino, 4 for 8, I had dreams. I had
5'9". Come on.
I still know a couple of people that could hook you up, Steve.
I started off, being a huge comic fan, of course, but what drew me to comics is the same thing that me and John really appreciate, which is the way power and strength is portrayed in the comics. We both loved the Hulk. We both gravitated toward the huge characters. I wasn't into like, little urban characters that weren't doing anything. Give me the Hulk grabbing the ground and then causing an earthquake or shaking the ground. So I was always inspired by these powerful characters. And then I don't know whether you also moved into it as well, but I got heavily into bodybuilding. I had pictures of all Arnold and Lou and all those big guys over the wall. And then once I got to a certain age and Odin and Zeus bequeathed me a certain amount of size, I was like, I should be a bodybuilder. And then I was like, I don't really have the pretty physique for a bodybuilder. What about a power lifter? And I was like, oh, no, I don't really have that brute strength. But wait a minute, what about a wrestler? So, finally, and by the way, don't ever tell your mum that you're going to be a wrestler. Whoa, wait, not in England. So for me, I've seen the connections for years. I'm in the gym constantly. There's bodybuilding. And I went and trained down at Gold's in Venice.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
I was right there. So one minute, some guy would come in there and he was on American Gladiators, like some 6'8" Goliath.
Nitro was there.
And then I was like, well, Lou would be hanging around as bodybuilders, but then I would notice, some wrestling types. And so I started to gravitate. And then I quickly realized, and I know, Craig, we're going to get into this, wrestlers are crazy. And I was like, oh, my word, really? Like, yeah, man, I can't walk this week because I jumped off this 40-foot thing and, I'm a little bit sore. And I'm like, what the bloody hell are you doing? So I started to pull back any idea of that. One guy came in the gym one day and his ankle was the wrong way. And I'm like, what the blah? I'm like, okay, all right, I'm not going to be a wrestler. But since then, whenever I've watched wrestling, or because I also looked at some of those magazines and I would see those grandiose costumes, and especially some of the villain stuff, I know they were pulling directly from comics. They were pulling all the masks and the capes and all the spandex and the makeup and the eyes and then the way out stories. I mean, what was it? What was his name? God, was it Sullivan? It was like
Kevin Sullivan.
Yes.
Oh my God, I loved writing Kevin Sullivan stories. Those were the best. He was amazing.
The Satanist. He was a Satanist.
It was like, hey, we're going to do a Kevin Sullivan story. Mine. I want it. It was great. But yeah, that stuff came up in the 80s. Like, you look at 60s and 70s wrestling, not so much, but it really, and you talk about comics. I want to say in Mexico, there were Mil Mascaras comics. I'm not sure about that. I know there were definitely the movies. But I believe like the first real, very athletic masked Japanese wrestler to hit the scene in the States was Tiger Mask.
Oh,
right? And I believe he was a manga star in the back in the day. So that's the comics to wrestling transition also.
Yeah. So Craig, tell us how you got into the, like, okay, you're a young kid doing the wrestling. I mean, reading the comics and all that stuff. Tell us your origins, how you got into the business.
My origin story. Okay. So, big comics fan growing up, went off to college, didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I'm young and stupid. I got involved in the college radio station, got involved in the college newspaper, really enjoyed both of those. Worked at a radio station off campus. So I knew I wanted to do something in media, public, but I didn't know what. I had no idea. Get out of college, come back to Long Island, and I'm answering every ad that I can find in the newspaper. Go off on interviews, nothing's happening. So now I answer this one ad from something called London Publishing. Never heard of them, didn't know what it was. They call me back. Peter King at the time was the editor-in-chief. Calls me up and says, hey, got your resume here. I really like it. Can you come in for an interview? I said, all right, yeah, sure. What do you do? Well, we're a magazine publisher. All right, what kind of magazines do you do? Pro wrestling. Now I've watched wrestling on TV, Lucha Libre on Channel 47. I even went, I went to the matches one time. My brother took me. We saw Bruno at Nassau Coliseum.
Yeah.
But I wasn't a big fan. If you asked me to name a half a dozen wrestlers at the time, I couldn't do it. So I said, well, let me think about it and I'll get back to you. 2 weeks go by. I've got another couple of job interviews going on. Nothing happens. Peter King calls me back again and says, hey, we still want you to come in for an interview. I said, all right, nothing to lose. I go in, do the interview. Now, the office was, oh boy, it was great. It was just the atmosphere. It was a bunch of young guys, secretary up front, but just a bunch of young guys hanging out at desks, banging away on typewriters. And I'm looking around, so, okay, this is kind of interesting. And all right, the job is you need to write 3 stories a day for the wrestling magazine. So 3,000 word stories. So that could either be a feature story or a column or whatever it is. So, all right, that sounds reasonable. I'll give this a shot. Maybe do it for a couple of months till I find something else. Well, a couple of months turned into 15 years. And it wound up being such a great creative atmosphere. I've talked about this a bunch, and I've said this on other podcasts. And because we cover all sorts of pop culture on this one, right? So if you think of the early days of TV and the Sid Caesar program, there's a great documentary out there called Caesar's Writers. And you think about the writer's room for that show. You had Woody Allen, you had Mel Brooks, you had what's his name? Worked on MASH. And there were like a half a dozen of these just comic geniuses working there, and the energy and the way that they would play off each other. That's what the magazine office was like. It was just a phenomenally creative atmosphere. So now my problem, of course, is I didn't really know a damn thing about wrestling, but I knew comics. So as I started working, and you mentioned Bill Apter earlier, and like he's really the guy. Like he could feed me the information, say, all right, you're writing a story about whoever it might be, Dusty Rhodes. Well, here's sort of the 101 on Dusty Rhodes. Here's what you need to know. And he's wrestling, I don't know, Jimmy Valiant. I don't even know if they did, but so here's the story about Jimmy Valiant. And, here's what you need to know. So then you just bang out 1,000-word story about that. As long as it played within the angle of what the guys were doing.
Would Bill give you the angle what was going on at that time? Like Dusty was feuding with Terry Funk or Kevin Sullivan at that time, whatever.
Right. Well, the way the magazines worked is we would have a headline session every Friday. Someone would scream out headlines, and we'd all bring our chairs in a circle. Bill would come over with folders of photographs and say, all right, for the next magazine, he'd open up the folder. Here's 8 photos of, I don't know, Tommy Rich versus Buzz Sawyer.
Oh,
all right.
Last battle of Atlanta, baby.
There you go. What are we going to do with Tommy Rich or Buzz Sawyer? So we'd sit around and come up with headlines. That was the first thing that we came up with, was the headline. So you'd have the headline. All right, move on to the next set of photos, come up with the next headline. So now you have a magazine and half a dozen headlines. Now it's up to the writer to just throw 1,000 words against that headline. Years later, by the way, after I left the magazines, I ran away and joined the circus, Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, parent company Felt Entertainment.
Perfect. Right after wrestling, perfect.
Yeah, it was perfect. And they were doing a show based on Goosebumps, the kids' soft horror books.
Yeah.
So I had a chance to have lunch with R.L. Stine, sitting right next to me. And he got his start the same way I got mine, except instead of wrestling magazines, he did it with movie magazines. And we were talking about the process of making the magazines exact same way. They would get a couple of photos, come up with the headline, write to fill a few pages, and off to the next one. It was not unlike what you're talking about comic books. You just sort of, we have a deadline to meet. We got to churn it out. Just, put it out there. And so the thing that I was able to get hooked into wrestling was I realized after very quickly, these are just flesh and blood comic book characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
The angle that these wrestlers are running, it's the same thing that, Fantastic Four versus Annihilus, off in the negative zone, whatever it might be, Spider-Man versus Mysterio. So I could sort of make that mental transition. And then I really came to become, I wouldn't say I actually became a fan of wrestling per se, the way you would think of someone as a fan. I really came to appreciate. I do want to say this because I've thought about this a lot over the years, and people say, "What is it that makes wrestling really attractive? What is it? What is it about wrestling that hooks a fan?" And Steve, you mentioned earlier about being in the gym and seeing guys, they come in with their ankle all busted up or whatever it might be. So everyone understands that there's stuff about wrestling that's absolutely real, right? They mess up their ankles. They bust up their knees. They when they jump off the top rope, they're hitting the canvas. That's not fake. Something is hitting something.
Yes.
So there's real stuff that's happening in wrestling. They also understand that this guy hates this guy, but does he really hate him? I mean,
Yeah.
they understand that, he gets punched. Is he really, the reaction, is it really worthy of it? Okay, so they know that some stuff is staged, fake, whatever word you want to put around it. What you don't know is what's the dividing line between those two things. And that dividing line changes all the time. And the way I put it is, in the dance of that line, that's the attraction of pro wrestling. Because you never really know what the separation between the real and the not so real is. And one of the greatest examples of that is probably the famous Jerry Lawler, Andy Kaufman thing.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
That was huge. You talk about that. That's very interesting how you said that about like that fine line, because sometimes when you watch it, even you were like, oh, he really hit him. It always suspends belief, and then sometimes like, I think that was real. Especially when you were kids and all that stuff. But you now,
sure.
Yeah, but now you writing,
right?
You. In the explosion of the rock and wrestling connection. Now, when you started, you probably had no idea how big this thing was really going to get, because you got the rock and wrestling Hulkamania rising. Now you got an international subject. You got little kids and grandparents talking about Hulk Hogan and pro wrestling. And pro wrestling and rock and roll. MTV comes into the scene. It becomes something else, and you are right in the pulse of that. Tell us about that. Like, okay, I'm not that big of a wrestling fan. This is fun, and now all of a sudden, it's this global sensation.
Oh yeah, I mean, I had a set when it really first started up, which was probably '83, and Cyndi Lauper started getting involved.
Yeah.
And her manager's name escapes me at the moment. I know he was very influential in getting a lot of that stuff set up.
Yeah, big record producer guy. He was a huge wrestling fan.
Huge wrestling fan.
Huge.
And it made a lot of sense to me. I think back, I'm like, could I see how big it was going to get? I don't know that anybody could see how big it was going to get. But I think I certainly knew it was going to get, this was the next step. Rock and roll and pro wrestling just made so much sense to me. Theatrics, they're both very theatrical. On the one side, it's about music. On the other side, it's athleticism. It's, stuntman work. It's all that stuff. It's comic books. But it just made a lot of sense to me. And it was like a snowball rolling down the hill. 83 and NBC got involved and WrestleMania happened. There were actually some pay-per-views before WrestleMania 1 that happened, that Cyndi Lauper was involved in. And
David Wolf.
David Wolf. Yes.
Okay, put up here for you guys.
And I should know that because I went to an event with, Keith Elliott Greenberg. You probably know the name, John, a wrestling writer from way back, very interesting guy. He wrote a book on Cyndi Lauper, and one of my photos of Cyndi and Lou Albano is in that book.
Okay.
But yeah, so I went to events where, there was the sort of rock and wrestling crossover was actually happening. So I could see the
Captain
energy.
Lou appeared in her video, in her MTV video.
Yep. He was in a couple of her MTV videos.
Yeah, after, but that first one, like that kind of got the whole thing kind of going, because David Wolf was obviously a wrestling fan. But then Hulk Hogan comes on the scene, and all this, that was such a glorious time, because You got the cartoons now. Now, tell me
Yeah,
your approach. Tell me your approach now to writing while this stuff is all exploding.
Oh, it
Were
was
they
great.
more serious? Did you have to be more serious?
A little bit. So, like when I started in 1981, I caught the tail end of sort of the very unserious wrestling magazines. Like you go back to the late 70s wrestling magazines, and there's just some.
They had so many of the bikini girls.
Well, yeah,
Right?
that was supposed to be wrestling, right? You have the apartment wrestling.
My uncle had a whole bunch of those. I used to pretend to read about Dusty Rhodes, but I wanted to see the wrestling in the apartment.
Right, he bought it for the stories, right?
Yeah. He had a ton of them.
Yeah, like when I first started out, it was kind of anything goes the way you would write a story. You'd be quoting a wrestler who was alone in the shower. Like, how does that happen? Driving alone in the car and you're quoting him. Like what? None of it made sense. Oh, I'll tell you the best story about that one. So, growing up in Long Island, there was a TV show out of New Jersey called The Uncle Floyd Show.
Okay.
So the Uncle Floyd, I got to describe it in 10 seconds. The Uncle Floyd Show was ostensibly like a kiddie show, but it was no script. It was fly by the seat of your pants, shoestring budget comedy for 30 minutes or an hour every night, 5 nights a week. They would have rock bands on. The Ramones were famously on there a couple of times. They would have wrestlers on. Larry Zbyszko was on there. So, and I loved the Uncle Floyd Show. He wore this pork pie hat and played barrel house piano like nobody's business. Tremendous. Just a great show. I mean, you can go down the rabbit hole of Uncle Floyd Show stuff online. But okay, so one of my first columns, I write about getting a phone call at the office that Larry Zbyszko had busted up the Uncle Floyd Show set. Now you have to understand, Uncle Floyd started every show sitting at a desk talking to this hand puppet named Oogie. He wasn't a ventriloquist. His mouth was moving like crazy, but he would have this, Oogie, what do you think of? That's crazy. They just talk back and forth, right? Okay, so Oogie the hand puppet. So we get this, I write this column, we get this phone call at the magazines. Larry Zbyszko is going crazy at the Uncle Floyd Show. All right, I hop in my car. I didn't, but I wrote that I did. Hop in my car, go out to the studio, and I get to the studio, in the story, of course, and Zbyszko had trashed the studio. It's a complete mess, carnage everywhere. Nobody's there except Oogie. Uncle Floyd's not there, but Oogie the hand puppet is there. And I interview Oogie for the article. right? Like, makes no sense whatsoever. Magazine hits the newsstand like 3 months later, and I'm still living at home at this time. I'm getting out of the shower, and my mom screams up to me, "Craig, you got a phone call." What the hell? I get on the phone. It was Uncle Floyd who tracked me down, calling me to tell me he loved the article. But it was just the height of absurdity. This hand puppet with no hand, and I'm interviewing the puppet. But that's the kind of stuff we would write. But to answer your question more directly, John, yeah, when it started becoming more national in scope, we had to tone that stuff down. We had to. We really thought about covering wrestling the way a newspaper would cover baseball or basketball or football. So we tried to do it very much more like that. Yeah, we'd still slip in some of the fun stuff, and especially like, you mentioned Kevin Sullivan earlier. How can you not have fun with stuff like that? But yeah, it was more. We were more serious about it. We were really trying to be, Pro Wrestling Illustrated in particular was trying to be more like.
Real wrestling journalism.
Sports Illustrated, wrestling journalism, which is sort of a funny term in and of itself. And boy, we were selling magazines like nobody's business. We outsold Sports Illustrated on the newsstand for a while. They had a few more subscribers, but yeah, we were outselling them on the newsstand. And PWI looks like it's going to outlive Sports Illustrated too, the way it's going. So,
wow.
Go ahead now.
So with you started in 1981, right? And you're seeing this evolution in pro wrestling. Character dynamics are coming into play. There's more thought into the characters. There's a lot more acting and things are going on. You went from writing this crazy stuff to trying to be more of like a real kind of news kind of magazine,
right?
Bring out what's going on. Was it easier for you guys to write the stories, having all this stuff kind of laid out, or did you find it harder?
I don't know if it was easier or harder, but it was definitely different.
Mhm.
One of the things, and John, I want to thank you. The Stanley Roy Thomas analogy you used
It,
earlier. I love that. I thank you. That's a huge compliment. But Bill and I were just two guys in an office that also included people like Stu Sachs and Dave Rosenbaum
Stu
and Bob
Sachs, yeah.
Smith, Joe Bua, and just a host of others. And I apologize if anybody that I didn't mention is listening to this and I left your name out. You know, shame on me. But most of us, and I think this is why our magazines did so well. Most of us went to college, studied journalism, or majored in English, worked on our college papers, understood journalism, and took a very serious approach. I mean, we would have hour-long debates about the Oxford comma in the office, that kind of stuff.
Well,
We were very, very serious. We were publishing professionals putting out wrestling magazines as opposed to wrestling fans putting out wrestling magazines. And I think that made a huge difference.
yeah, because I love how you guys also did like dream matches and like
Yes.
you guys really played that up. And we got a few pictures here because the thing I want to show of you and the wrestlers was also
Okay.
like you kind of showed it was almost like how Stan Lee was breaking that wall. You almost thought like if you could be in the bullpen and
Yes.
like it was like he was talking to you. But you guys see it was different. Those superheroes didn't exist, but these
Right.
wrestlers did. So
Yep.
you could bring them into the offices or like have fun with them, and it's like you showed character of yourself.
I'm really glad you said that because that kind of stuff, that's why I was very much a Marvel guy growing up. I got all the DC and all the rest of the stuff, but I loved Marvel, things like Stan's Soapbox, things
Oh,
like, and I went up to the bullpen one time. I was fortunate enough. I have a
well,
couple of artifacts here we can share it a bit later on.
yeah.
Um,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
but yeah, the way that I think that was really part of Stan's genius was um, the connection between the company and the brand and the readers. And I had that kind of idea in mind all the time because, being a comic guy coming from that, I would always try and figure out ways to try and, infuse the wrestling magazines with that sort of stuff.
So now show some pictures. These are great. I mean, they're actually
The captain. I love that. Yeah, we had Lou came up to the office several times. Great guy. We actually at that
love
time
to drink. Love to drink.
love to drink. That photo was taken in Freeport, which you go about a mile or two from the office, and there was sort of a long, what they call the Miracle Mile, which was docks. It was docks. Fishing boats would be in Freeport and go out. And there was a boat called the Captain Lou that was parked there. Lou Albano had nothing to do with it, but we got pictures of Captain Lou with the Captain Lou boat. It was great. But
Another
yeah,
one now.
my fellow
Wow.
tag team champion.
Yeah, Ricky Steamboat. Ricky Steamboat always keeping himself in shape. Was actually a bodybuilder.
Right.
Did a couple bodybuilder competitions. He beat out Jimmy Snuka in a bodybuilding show. Snuka came in second. They actually did that. But tell us about this one.
Boy, that was just one of those days. I think I probably he came up to the office, or it was either that or it was one of the trips to the Carolinas that Bill and I made. We made so many of them, where we would set up the photo studio backstage, and the wrestlers would come by, and yeah, if they're sometimes they would come by, just snap the picture, let me go. Other times they were just hang out, they'd be friendly, they'd be chatting with Bill and me a little bit, but mostly Bill, and they'd pose for a gag photo here
They
and there.
really
It was
appreciated
fun.
those magazines though because it got
Oh,
them their
they
names out
really
Oh,
there.
did. Yeah, everybody wanted to be on the cover,
Oh,
and God bless him, Bill. I'll tell you about Bill after, and I've told him this. Bill, and I say this with all sincerity, Bill has achieved in life what so many people wish they could, but never do. And what I mean by that is he is doing what he loves. He has always done what he loves.
Oh,
He
yeah.
continues to do what he loves, and he has made what he loves his life and his career. And he's so genuine with it, and he's so funny. I mean, if you ever seen Bill in
He's
action,
just eccentric as the wrestling. He's part of that.
he's all energy, he's all positivity, and watching him do photographs, studio photographs of the wrestlers. He does things that, I mean, real and Bill's an A-list photographer, but I mean, real, you think of the top of the top photographers doing Rolling Stone covers or whatever else it might be. He has his own sort of way, his own shtick, his own routines,
Yeah.
his way of talking and getting the subject of the photo relaxed and in a good humor. And they will do things for Bill that nobody else I've ever seen will do in a photo studio. But because it's Bill, because they love him and he loves them and he's genuine and he gets them relaxed and funny.
That was the thing.
He gets those shots.
Him. Yeah.
And they could they could trust him. It was all about the trust.
And he knew how to do the kayfabe. Like, he knew how to do like, if they were spontaneous, he could play off that. And he was almost like oh my God, I can't think of him right now. The manager of the Midnight Express. What was his
name?
Jim Cornette, who was a big comic fan, but it was inbred in him too. Huge comic fan, huge wrestling fan, but he knew right off the bat, even before he became professional, how to like work off that. So now, show a few more pictures.
There they are. There they are, the boys.
Yes.
That was
tell me when you first met these guys. You know how much they mean to me. Like, my God.
Oh boy, probably the first time I met them was one of the Pro Wrestling Illustrated press conferences out of Georgia. And for a while, Bill and I would go down and interview the wrestlers, and like 3-minute segment on TV. And Paul Ellering would be there with the two of them, right? Because it was the Legion of Doom, and Ellering was great he was just great on the mic. I loved his stuff.
Yeah,
he was truly the smorgasbord of violence and all the stuff he would come up with. And so this was actually taken the same day. We spent a day with the Road Warriors in New York City.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah, remember that feature? It was in Wrestling 84, 85, one of those.
Oh, they're eating the trash out of the dumpster and all that
trash
stuff?
out of the dumpsters and giving money to the vagrant in the street and coming up out of the subways and whatnot.
Hawk had the gym shirt on, like the gym, like the Gold's Gym. Oh, with the sleeve. Oh, it was so, they were coming out of like the suburb. The streets were all safe at that time, you know.
And it was a week. It was a Saturday or a Sunday, and my brother worked in Midtown, just off Times Square, and he said, I told him what we were doing with the Road Warriors, and I said, do you think we could come up to the office with the studio equipment and set up the backdrop and the lights and get some photos? Because you can't do that in the street, right? You need a place. And he's like, yeah, do it. So I actually have the same photo like this, except it's my brother being held up in the air. So, but yeah, great day, great guys. They loved what we did for them, and there you go.
I love this one with the finger.
That was 84 when they won Tag Team of the Year on their that was when they that's 85. Isn't that 80? No, that's 84. 84.
Yeah, it's 84. I can't read that.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, Bill, I don't know, it's probably never going to see the light of day, but Bill has a book of wrestlers, boxers, and other celebrities all giving the finger. So this was an addition to that finger book. But
what was so good about that article, when you were a kid, you only saw them on TV, but the wrestling magazines, you're looking at the pro wrestling rankings and all that, but actually seeing the Road Warriors or it was like the private side, you could see them at home or was something, and it was crazy because they're real people. Like, oh my God, like that was
especially them, the Hawk and Animal. I mean, they had that comic vibe. That comic book hero vibe. And they were just, boy, they would come out and they'd have the shoulder pads with the spikes coming up, and they'd come running out and hit the ring, and the Iron Man music blasting. I mean, there was just nothing like it.
Yeah, that's incredible. Go ahead, Steve. Wow.
It's I'm very envious, of course, because obviously I was over in England, so I didn't get to see some of this magic. I was still watching wrestling And our English wrestling, I'm going to throw some names out there that,
Exotic Adrian.
I mean, we had John Haystacks, Big Daddy.
Big Daddy, yeah.
We had Mick McManus. And we had a guy called Cat Weasel. And his finishing move was he'd stick his finger up your ass. Unbelievable. Our wrestling was from the 1950s.
Wow.
And we had a commentator that had been
I feel like Cat Weasel could have done pretty well in ECW.
The funny thing is that whenever he did it, they would do this like little whistle sound.
No, we gotta find him.
I gotta find that clip.
So
we gotta do some
I'm
Cat
watching
Weasel
this
research
wrestling.
here. That's awesome.
It's very old-fashioned. Again, I think it's akin to 1950s American wrestling.
Right.
With people coming in and not really wrestling, but like doing a lot of things and holding and claws and all sorts of weird stuff, but not actually wrestling. And you were mentioning, John, about the pivotal moments in 1983, Rocky 3.
Oh,
and so I'm watching
Survivor.
Rocky 3,
Survivor.
and when I see Thunder Lips coming down, I was just like, "Whoa! That human is he 60 foot tall? What the hell's going on here?" And after I saw that, I was like, "Wow, our English wrestling is not very good. God's sakes, man! I gotta find some sort of American wrestling." It took because there was no American wrestling on English TV. There was nothing. Okay. First time that I saw any American wrestling was they started to get the events on VHS tapes in some of the places where you could rent. And my friend said, "Steve, I've got this tape. It's the Royal Rumble. And it features a guy called Big John Studd." And I was like, "Oh, well, let's take it home and watch it." And so it was our first exposure. And I know, Craig, you're probably going to laugh your head off. I'm used to all these old guys coming out and not doing anything. Suddenly there's like, when I saw John Studd, I was like, "God sakes." He came out and, and of course he wins that event. I think it was
the second one.
I think it was 88, maybe.
No, 88. Yeah, it's the second one. He won the second one.
Yeah. So that's Cat Weasel. Oh my God.
Oh, do you think he could take the Road Warriors?
Look at that's our English wrestling.
So to move him, he stuck it in his mouth. Look, he
wanted it in return.
It's
Oh yeah. See?
Oh no. Here it comes.
I was trying to find the
yeah. The only good thing
penetrational move
is I didn't realize it at the time, but I was also able to watch a very young British Bulldog. He was very, very young. And,
Dynamite.
And
Dynamite.
I also saw a Dynamite Kid.
Yes.
Very, very, very young.
The greatest.
And so I got to see all this stuff. But for me, the impetus of this great American wrestling thing was Rocky 3. And of course, you see Mr. T, and then I realized that, when it comes to wrestling, you got to go over to the States. I didn't know anything about Canada, of course, because, I'm, young and naive. But that's that's where I came from. And then when I came over to the States, that's when I was like, I came over in 1991. That's when I started to watch some stuff. And I always remember the first time I saw the Warlord.
Yeah.
I saw the Warlord, and as you know, I got a similar look to the Warlord, and I was like, I want to be the Warlord. And there's a promo, I think it's Survivor Series, and British Bulldog's going like this. At that time he's huge, and he goes, "Hey, Warlord, you want to get your arms around these shoulders?" And I was just like, "Oh my God, Warlord," So, but when the Warlord came out with the mask and he was holding the baton and the tape, that's all comics. That's all comics. So that's what I was like, oh my God, and they get to come out and do these speeches, and that's when you would realize that some people couldn't speak as good as others, and then of course You have the Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah.
Oh
Yes.
my word!
Favorite.
Doing a whole interview with his back to the camera, so you just see his back pumping, and I'm like, is he going to turn around? You know, it's just that's all comics.
Yes,
All of it.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And it was inspired by obviously the Road Warriors too, because he was the Blade Runners before that. But the Ultimate Warrior looked like the Road Warriors, but he was a little more eccentric. The Road Warriors are more scary, where the Ultimate Warrior was like this eccentric superhero type of guy that once again like a Hulk Hogan, but totally different. But like you can see why kids loved it.
Yes.
But
Right, with a little bit of Sting mixed in.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
But Sting was more of the athlete, you know, like he wasn't as eccentric as Ultimate Warrior. But let me ask you this, Craig. I want to I had this always, you know, we would always every month you'd have to look at the ratings, like the who made those ratings, who decided what they're going to be, and I want to know like the top 10 and of all those, you know, the ratings of all the different tell me how those all come about.
We all did. That was sort of part of the headline session that I mentioned earlier. We'd also have meetings for the ratings. So it would, you know, who would be number one? It was kind of obvious in a lot of places, but sometimes not so much. So we talk about it, and it was a lot of back and forth. Bill was very influential in those, but you know, everyone that was working on the wrestling side of the house, you know, because we also did boxing magazines and other stuff, baseball, hockey. But everyone that worked on wrestling had a say in what the ratings were. And yeah, there was the hardest part with that was, you know, there was such a lag between the time we put the magazine to bed and sent it off to the printer and the time it hit the newsstands. So you're talking, you know, 7-8 weeks. So if you knew, you know, Bill, because he had the inside track to the business in a lot of ways, you know, if you knew that so-and-so, who's the most hated wrestler, is going to do a turn to face in a month, what do you do? You know, they stick him as most hated. You can't put him in most.
Most popular.
You had to have those sorts of things. I do, when we talk about the ratings and all, I do want to give a tip of the hat and give huge credit to Bob Smith, because he is the guy that came up with the PWI 500.
Oh yeah, that became huge. That was a big deal.
And originally we were going to do the PWI 100, and Bob says 100. Let's do 500. It's Stu Sachs is like, "Why, you think you could do 500? Sure, no problem." And he was up there, you know, pulling all-nighters, and he's the guy that made it happen. So,
Craig, let me ask you this though.
Credit.
Let me ask you this. Did any wrestlers get mad at where they were rated and they said they should have been higher or lower? Did they ever call? Because I'm sure they took some of that stuff seriously.
It would happen. Yeah, occasionally it would happen. Sure. Less about the ratings, more about the cover. You know, oh, I have the small shot on the cover. Why don't I have the big shot? all of that would run downhill and filter over to Bill's desk. Because, you know, the downside of being the conduit between the company and the business and having all those relationships is that when somebody does have something to complain about, they're going to call Bill about it. They're not going to call me or Stu Sachs or Dave Rosenbaum or Bob Smith. Bill's going to catch it all. But, you know, he maintained those relationships. So most of the time, if they were complaining about something, it was in fun.
Now I have to ask you this one.
There were a couple of incidents that were a little more serious than that, but most of it was in fun. Come on, Bill.
Let me ask you this one. When they had on Pro Wrestling Illustrated, anybody that doesn't know, they always had a pinup in it, and basically they had a little biography about them in the front, but in the back they had like their greatest match, their toughest opponent, and all this stuff. Now, did you get input from the wrestlers, or you guys just kind of came up on that by yourself?
We would come up with that stuff ourselves. Yeah, that was us.
Oh wow!
Those bios were kind of a pain to put together, but they were good because it was like, all right, you know, sort of assembling all the pieces of information from all over the place to get into those bios. And if you look at those through the years, like you look in the 81, 82 issues, they're pretty complete, but they're not that lengthy. You get a little further, 85, 86, 87, 88, the font size gets smaller. There's a lot more detail in there. I mean, they really became pretty good until one point where we put out this bad boy. The
Oh,
Wrestling
I remember
Almanac.
that. Yes, you
Yep.
did the.
And this was like the first of its kind. It had the bios, it had just all the history and the history of the titles. And I loved this sort of stuff because this is the kind of thing that put real legitimacy behind all the other stuff we were doing.
Definitely.
It was, and fans like us ate that stuff up. Like, because like I said, it was like the superhero aspect, but then you got to get the human aspect.
Right.
Like, wow, like
Right.
it was. Now we got a few covers, and we want to talk because you have some pretty legendary covers here.
Oh, sure.
And I want to just see what the first one I want to show now. Show them the Hulk Hogan one. You sent me this one. I didn't know. I remember this was the one with
Kamala.
yes.
Hang on one.
Why was that interesting?
Bring it. Is this the one with Kamala with Hogan's head on the spike?
Yes. Wait a second, my boy Niall. You got that?
Here. Yeah, it's not coming up though. Hold on one second.
Okay.
So,
but let me ask you this before you talk about it, because I want people to see it. First, I got to ask: that was controversial? Did Hulk Hogan like that cover, or was he upset with that cover?
I don't remember.
He's got a big ego.
That's a great question for Bill. I don't remember hearing any blowback about that cover, other than some retailers. This is sort of a good aspect of the question that you asked earlier about what changed in the mid 80s when wrestling became very national and very popular. Blood on the cover was something we had to be very, very careful about. You could do it in the late 70s and the early 80s. There we go. That's all right. So my memory is not always the best, and I'm the first one to admit it. And Bill and I will go back and forth. Who came up with this? Who came up with that? I'm going to take credit for this one because I very specifically remember coming up with this idea. Let's put Hulk Hogan's head on a spike with Kamala, because Kamala was huge at the time.
Yes, and
so what are we gonna...
Steve, you should know Kamala was scary too. He was one of those legit scary characters that kids got so scared about.
Yeah,
he was like
he kind of had that Bruiser Brody,
Abdullah the Butcher
aspect to him. Like you didn't know what he was going to do next.
Yeah.
And this of course is before Photoshop. Because what year is that? That's 87, I think. Yeah, because Starrcade 86.
Yes, March of 87.
Yep. So this is like probably March 87. We're probably putting that together in December of 86. So no Photoshop, no computers. Ken Morgan, our art director, was an absolute genius. He was sort of the unsung hero of the magazines. He would do stuff graphically that we'd ask him to come up with something, and boy, did he did great jobs with it.
Even as kids, when we saw that, we were like, oh my God, like that caught our eyes. It was like these were like comic magazine covers,
God, I love this cover. I'll tell you what.
I've seen
you could never get away with it today.
Like Express here in the Road Warriors, is that?
That's on the scaffold.
Scaffold match.
And like almost broke his knee.
Yes.
Yeah, that's when Jim Cornette fell off and he broke his knee.
It's horrible.
Yeah, well, they were 25 feet up. Yeah, we got another one.
Got a bunch of them. You want me to just throw them up?
Yeah. Obviously, this one.
Great. We did a couple covers like this, and this is a great example of the wrestling comic book crossover. This was one of those situations where we came up with the idea for the cover. I want to take credit for it. Maybe it wasn't me, but apologies to Stu Sachs or Bill if they're listening to this. I feel like this was mine also, and I'll tell you exactly why. Avengers Annual, I want to say number.
I already have it.
Oh, my man. That's it. That is.
I knew Steve was like that.
That is exactly the cover I had in mind. And we did that a couple of times. We did it with the Koloffs and the Road Warriors. And we did it with Cornette and the Midnight Express. I want to say against the Rock and Roll Express, maybe. But we did a couple of these sort of group face-off covers. And Avengers Annual #2. That was exactly the cover that I had in mind when we were talking about photos like that. Beautiful example of comic book wrestling crossover.
And Steve, one of the greatest covers of all time right there. Like, that's got to be in
Oh
That-
yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, come
Oh.
on now. I mean, I felt sorry for the Black Panther at the time. Because,
Right. Well, I'll tell you something else about this cover. And I think
Hawkeye.
John, you were talking about it earlier, just how, comics in that era would just create a feeling within
Oh.
you, right? It was just like you see that cover and it was just, you
It was
felt something.
real. It was
It
real.
set something off.
It-
The best of the Marvel movies, I loved them. It was Civil War at the airport when it was basically that cover, right?
Yes.
And I saw that. I'm in the theater and I'm watching that scene, and my 10-year-old head was exploding inside. It was like they nailed it. They just captured that feeling.
Oh, it's because the creativity was real. These guys
Yep.
were making a paycheck and and they were just putting their magic, and like I said, they were unappreciated, but they were putting this thing that was literally today it's all processed. I hate
Right.
to say it, it's like wrestling today. It's like I respect these guys what they do, but you can see the dance, you can see it just does it reminded me of Steve's wrestler there that stuffs that like it reminds me of that, like it's so choreographed, but there was something real about like I said, the wrestling, because it was raw. These guys had to come up with those kind of characters. There was no you learn to wrestle, but they had to come up like on their own, these how they're going to speak, how they're going to act, what they're going to do. That was all raw, like I said, raw talent. It was all visceral.
They knew their audience.
Yeah.
If you're in the audience,
Yes.
and you've been reading comics, or you're a bodybuilder, okay, or you watch movies with monsters and stuff like that. And I remember specifically that feeling you get of like, oh my God, is this really going to happen? I remember Earthquake was going to like jump on Hulk Hogan. He's up there, right? And down comes the Ultimate Warrior, and he just completely slams
Swinging
him
into the
around, right? I
ring.
remember thinking, God's sakes, he just handled Earthquake like nothing. And everyone, and you see, because
It was a
building
Jack
into
Kirby
power
2-page
fantasy.
action panel.
Tell us I want to know about the Road Warriors very first cover. Now, can you put that one up now? Because I love the story behind this one.
Yes.
Obviously, I'm sorry, wrestling fans out there, we're pro Road Warriors here. So it's like, I know we have Hulk Hogan's and Ric Flair fans, but no, for me, it's here. So tell me about this one. And this is the Road Warriors' first cover ever.
Yep, another one of my favorite covers of all time. And you look at the Warriors, and there were a couple of people that a couple of guys in the business that would come along. Warriors were two of them. Sting was another one. Lex Luger. They had a certain level of charisma, and you knew that they were going to go the distance. They could just be anything they wanted to be in this business, and the Warriors were definitely them. So we got them up in the studio. I forget exactly where this picture was taken. This is like a year and a half before the stuff we were talking about earlier in New York City. Probably in Atlanta or the Carolinas would be my guess. So we had this portable studio set up, paper backdrops, lights, the whole bit. And we would go into, Bill and I would go on a road trip, and we'd set up the photo studio in a hotel room, move the bed over to the other side of the room, bring the wrestlers in. And Bill's posing the Warriors against the backdrop, and this pose, that pose, look like this, and it just something clicked in my head. And I'm sorry, Stu, sorry, Bill, I'm taking credit for this one too, because I remember this very clearly. I'm like, Bill, hold on, let me grab one of the lights, because I think there were 4 lights that he had. Let me grab one of them, and I'm going to lay on the floor, and I'm going to shine the light up, like the classic thing we all do as kids at Halloween. You put the flashlight under your chin to look scared.
Yeah.
I said, let's give it a shot and see if anything comes out. Because it's not digital film, so you're sort of taking shots, and you don't know until later on when it's developed if it comes out or not. So I'm laying on the floor, and I'm holding the light up, different angles and whatnot. And Bill's snapping away, and we would get back to the office after the trip. We'd have all these rolls of film, black and white color. We'd take them down the street to the camera store in town, who did all our developing. And every day it was like, do we get the film back yet? We got the film back yet? When do we get the film back? And we got the slides back for this one, and it was just like, oh man, this is money shot right here. This is just perfect.
Yeah.
And a shout out to my friend Dan Hedstrand. I love you to death, Dan. And his brother Michael here is Hawk. That I love him to. Such a good friend of mine. I love him to death. But like this is you did unbelievable work.
I just wish Hawk was here where he could explain what he did to get that neck and traps. Really, that is astounding. Look how thick that collar must be 22 inches.
Yeah, and he would flex it and pop the collar off.
Yeah,
Great. He'd do that. He'd do that during interviews. Yeah,
but unbelievable.
Cutting a promo, and he just like.
And Craig, a big part of our podcast is like celebrating the legends, and we love to show who they are to people that might not know. You guys, honestly, Bill Apter and you and the other guys, but like you guys are not as appreciated because it was these stupid wrestling magazines. Who cares? But you brought magic to my life and all my friends because
I appreciate that.
We would, we would always at school we would like trade the magazines, and I remember one of my friends reading the Wrestling '84, and it was from that photo shoot, and his name was Jay something, but he for private reading he was looking at that, and I was like, how does he have that wrestling? It was just so singed in my brain. I could see the Road Warriors, and like it was from that photo shoot. It was Wrestling '84, and it was like, Are they going to ban the Road Warriors? But I mean, those images and those things captured my imagination and millions of other kids. And like, you guys are underappreciated, and I'm glad we get to express this and show who you are, like, and where it all comes from, because this is the education we love to show people. And
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
It's magic you guys did. It truly is, because you guys inspired millions. I'm just one of millions of people.
I want to throw a couple quick things up there because I'm not plugged where I am. I'm not plugged into an outlet, and my computer just told me I'm running out of. So I may get cut off here, and I apologize in advance if my computer goes out for lack of battery.
We'll give you the big head. We'll give you the big head.
I do want to do a couple of quick comic book wrestling crossovers. WCW magazine. I mean, WCW comic book.
The comic book, yes.
You might have seen that. I was actually a character in this issue. So it was Crusher Craig Teeters, not Craig Peters, but yeah, I trained Sting. So I was actually a character in the WCW comic. That was fun.
Oh, great.
Cool.
Well, as long as you weren't taking on Vader, you're okay.
The Sting Collector Special #2. This is interesting because we actually had this is one of my favorite magazines we ever did. We had a mini Marvel comic.
Oh, wow.
That was drawn by Ron Wilson.
Oh, cool.
Wow, Ron Wilson.
So,
yeah.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I've never seen that before.
Ron did a bunch of stuff for us, and I want to mention this before I run out of battery here. One of my.
Oh no!
Ding 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 ding.
That's a first for us. That's a first for us. That's a first for us.
Is he dead?
He's
okay,
he's
Steve.
gone.
Well, hopefully we get him back. But like now, what do you? First, let's talk about. If he doesn't come back, we can wrap this up. But tell me what you think of all this stuff, like and how the wrestling magazines and how it all comes together with the comic book.
Me, man. I mean, obviously we're a little bit different in age here, but for me, I got into wrestling in probably '89 and '90. Right, watching WWF, Ultimate
Still
Warrior
great
was my
stuff.
guy. Loved it. Then I took a bit of a hiatus, got back to it in 19. So I went from WWF to then all of a sudden getting introduced to WCW, and that's where, because I started getting a fan of Sting, and I watched Sting go from that colorful look to that, the Crow, right? He basically turned into the Crow. But I mean, I had my WCW magazines, I had all that stuff, which was great. Oh, we got him back in. Here we go. But maybe not the magazines Craig was working on, but it's still same thing. We were trading them at school. It was a huge deal. I think everyone almost has that phase of, where wrestling impacts their life, because it's a soap opera where people kick each other's asses.
Yeah. Are you back? Craig? Everything set?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. I went from the
show and
laptop.
tell for us.
Yeah,
went from the laptop to the phone here. Yeah.
Let's do this. I'm gonna bring
two more show and tell pieces. There's there's a Philly-based comic artist, Box Brown, who's done the Andre the Giant book. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No, that's interesting. What's his name?
Really good. Box Brown.
Oh.
So he did a book on. He's done several books out there. Andre the Giant, and he also did one on Andy Kaufman.
Oh yeah.
And the story of the Kaufman, Jerry Lawler, and actually Bill and I photographing that event is chronicled in this book, which is pretty neat. Again, more wrestling and comics crossover. But here's the one, and I'm hoping that somebody watching this podcast is going to be able to figure this out for me, because it hasn't made sense to me for years. So I showed you the thing earlier where we had the 3-page Sting comic in one of the magazines.
Mhm.
Right.
That magazine came out in, let me check real quick. I don't know, because there's no date on it on the
It's
cover.
probably the Sting one. That was probably like the early '90s. Has to be like it
So
has
like
to.
1992.
Yeah, it had to be in that time
Yes,
because
92. All right.
Yeah.
Check on the inside. It was 92.
Yeah.
Now, I've got one of my prized comic-related possessions is, does this look familiar?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
The Marvel Productions.
But look at the initials on there.
Stan
SL.
Lee.
Oh.
This
Oh,
is
wow.
There we go.
Oh,
Here.
Oh, very nice.
Stan.
Why don't you read it for us?
So a handwritten letter from Stan, but this is dated September 1987.
Okay.
And he writes, "Dear Craig, many thanks for sending me the 2 wrestling mags. Enjoyed them, especially my write-up, as you'd expect. Hope you like the way the wrestling strip turns out. If not, I guess I can expect a visit from Hulk Hogan. Thanks for the kind words and best of luck to you, Excelsior Stan."
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
I'll be damned if I know what the hell Stan is talking about in this letter. I don't remember, and we must have done something, writing some sort of write-up that's probably something to do with Hulk Hogan, because at the time, Marvel had the Hulk trademark, and
The trademark. Yeah.
right, there's a whole bunch of trademark stuff going on with that. But I don't have a whole lot of back issues. I have some. I've looked through everything I have, anniversary issues. I can't find anything having to do with wrestling and comics in PWI in '87. But this was September '87. He thanked us for some sort of write-up. So if anybody comes across what that is, please let me know.
Wow. But still, like, once again, the connection there with the wrestling and the comic books and all that stuff. And in '87, that was WrestleMania 3. So that was all over the world. So even Stan Lee knew what was going on with professional wrestling and all that stuff, because that was a huge deal. But good old Stan, like what like just magic. Just like I can't stand when people don't think that like he knows how to write. You know how, Steve, help me there. Like when he just those simple words, you can feel his energy and you feel part of it. It's like, I'm just saying, like, just that magic. And he can take any subject like professional wrestling, which has so much to do with Stan. It's just magic. So go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
Craig, one of the amazing things is, and again, because me and John are of a certain age, and Niall, of course, is a little baby, so he doesn't quite get it. But I've always loved printed media and fanzines. I used to, famous monsters, which would be the same, black and white pictures, and he'd be like, and in this scene, King Kong lifts the Tyrannosaurus jaw. Okay, I get, so you could see it. But the work you did on those magazines, they're timepieces.
Oh,
they're there forever. Whereas a lot of stuff today, it's online, it's digital, it's in an archive.
Right.
But if something really weird happens, and the server it's gone. Now, if anyone is going to be doing a serious book on any wrestling from that period of time, they better have a library of those magazines so they can go through and say, oh, wait a minute. No. Jimmy Snuka was at this auditorium on the 15th of October, 1982. Here's a picture. There it is. So what you've created is going to last as long as that paper lasts, which is, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So again, you must have a great amount of pride, because I definitely would, that you have created this library of material. It's an amazing resource.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I was not only was I a huge comic book fan growing up, but I was a big magazine junkie. I bought all sorts of stuff off the newsstands, from I don't know, weekly magazines about World War II to Mad, of course, all the Warren magazines, Esquire, National Lampoon. You name it. The 70s was really the glory age of magazine publishing.
Yes.
And I look at when I look at the wrestling magazines as a whole, not just all the stuff that we did out of our company, but just wrestling magazines as a genre. Mm-hmm. I can visualize a straight line starting back in the 40s with the pulp magazines, the genre the science fiction and detective magazines, and all the way through into the 60s with what they would call the men's sweat magazines. And then the wrestling magazines would start up, wrestling and boxing, and then into the 70s and 80s. So yeah, I'm with you. I think there's a real lineage to the wrestling magazines as part of American pop culture, as part of American publishing history, that really doesn't get recognized. And boy, would I love to see Taschen do a book about wrestling magazines.
Oh yeah. See, and it once again, it comes down to the respect of those things. It's like, I still think even today they're underappreciated. They never got the recognition because people don't know, like us kids, like getting into them. They were the comic books, they were the wrestling magazines. They were one and the same, and they were always kind of near each other. And like I said, I think those wrestling magazines, especially, they brought out the characters. Especially at that time, the time you guys were there, it was truly that golden age that it really brought out these characters of who they were. Because, like you said, in the 70s and 60s, you had a lot of the blood, and they were characters there too.
Right.
But when you come into the 80s, all of a sudden they're a little more glamorous. There's a little more shiny. There's a little more cover. Mm-hmm. Now, seeing people like Hulk Hogan, the Road Warriors, and Ric Flair, like, you start seeing that color, and it was a perfect mishmash, like the superheroes. Like Steve said, they came out with the spandex, and then they had the physiques to match, because that's something during the 60s and 70s they didn't have. They didn't really have those physiques. But then, Jimmy Snuka, and then Steamboat, and the Road Warriors.
Yep. And wrestlers were Bruiser and Crusher, but yeah, you're exactly right. Snuka and the Road Warriors. Yep.
Right. You had Superstar Billy Graham.
Superstar Graham, absolutely.
You guys got to give is the first.
Yeah.
Yep.
He comes
but
out,
he was But he was an anomaly. Then it became different. Then they started taking that stuff, and everybody started, and it just became part of it. So once again, okay, really quick, Neil, now what's going on here?
Well, no, I was just looking up something while you were chatting, and it appears that in 1987, in the Spider-Man news strip, the weekly script, Spider-Man went into professional wrestling. So I wonder if there was any connection there with that letter he received.
It could be.
And Stan was writing it at this time.
Stan was writing it, and his brother Larry Lieber was drawing it.
Yeah, Roy didn't come in till a little bit later.
Yeah.
So that might
December 28th, 1987.
Wow, that's a good catch, Niall. Bloody hell.
I have to get in touch with Bill and see if he has 87 era PWIs laying around that I could go back and check it out. I think I have the year-end issue, but that's it.
Lying around.
Yeah. Well, I have a question. Hang on real quick, John. Old Dirty Fatty, great name. Before he disappears again, can he tell us if there is a way to get our hands on back issues or digital editions? eBay, of course, has tons of back issues. Digital stuff, I believe, if you go to Pro Wrestling Illustrated's website, they may offer digital editions. I'm not sure about that. I will tell you, one of the reasons I left the company at that time, there were a couple, but I really wanted to get the company involved in the internet. This was 86, right? Really early on. And the owner at that time had no interest in it. So that, among a couple of other reasons, was why I wound up leaving the company. And that's when I ran away and joined the circus.
and manage their online marketing and content. So, but yeah, I thought there was real opportunity because, boy, there's such a great catalog of back issues and just looking at that stuff again. There's a couple of Facebook pages and Twitter, now X, feeds that go back and we'll post photos and pages from the old wrestling magazines, and I subscribe to those. It's always fun to see that stuff pop up.
I'm surprised I'm surprised that right behind you right now you don't have like these volumes bound with gold writing on there.
Actually, I'm doing this from a different room in my house, but if I was up in my office, you wouldn't see wrestling, but you would see original art from Jack Kirby on my wall. I have a Jack Kirby pencil page, and I've got some Steranko posters. Yeah, that's sort of like my comics man cave.
Yeah.
Much more comics and music than wrestling these days.
No one could draw like wrestling thugs like Kirby.
Oh, I love Kirby stuff. I have probably every trade that's been done on Kirby. Jack Kirby Collector is a fantastic publication.
Yes.
Oh, of course.
And Roy's Alter Ego, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in wrapping up, Craig, I still want to go. We talked about this offline before we went live here. Let's obviously. We don't want to get into all politics of it, but Vince McMahon is in the news and all that stuff. But like, you have like a little incidents with Vince on how he approached the magazines and all that stuff that was coming out there because he wanted WWF magazine to be the #1 magazine and all that stuff, and that he had competition with you guys. Tell us your interactions with the WWF in your magazine.
Well, a little known fact about all this, and people talk about WWF magazine, but before there was WWF magazine, Vince had Victory magazine. I don't know if you remember that. No. But the first issues of his magazine were called Victory magazine. And if you look at the old issues of The Wrestler and Inside Wrestling, you will see a little logo in the corner, in the top left corner. That was something I wanted to steal from Marvel too, by the way, that top left corner box and stick wrestlers in there, but they never went for it.
Steve Ditko box, yeah.
But if you look at the top left corner of those magazines, it said Victory Sports Series. Okay. So Stanley Weston, who owned the PWI family of magazines, actually sued Vince McMahon over Victory magazine, and he had to change the name of the magazine to WWF magazine.
Oh,
a lot of people forget that WWF magazine was Victory before it was WWF. Wow. But I think it was a couple of things. He had his own magazine. He kicked us off the ring. We used to hang out on on the ring taking photos. My first months with the company, when I started taking photos, leaning on the ring at Madison Square Garden, it was Bill Apter to my left, Paul Heyman to my right.
Yeah.
Taking photos. He was a photographer also. Yeah, that's how he started out. But I think it was a combination of our magazines were competition to his. They were and they weren't. His was 100% slick paper, 100% color. Ours weren't, unfortunately. But I think he also really wanted to control the characters that he was investing in. Which on a certain, okay, it makes sense. I get it. If I was in his position, would I do the same thing? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. Any publicity is free publicity. There's a couple of sides to that coin. But we got through it pretty well. We couldn't quote his wrestlers the way we quoted wrestlers elsewhere, which is to say, we couldn't be liberal with making up quotes. If we knew a wrestler was going to Vince, going to WWF, Bill had those great relationships, so he would get them in the photo studio right before they went. So we would have, we'd stock up on fresh photos that we could use on the cover and insides, and we would shoot from the stands at the matches. Famously, one of Bill's assistants smuggled in a camera to Madison Square Garden, where I think he put the body of the camera down his pants, and he had the long lens in a submarine sandwich.
Oh,
In a roll, like in a long roll.
Yeah.
So you open up the roll, instead of meat and cheese, it was the lens for the camera. And why are you bringing food into the arena? Well, I have a special diet, so yeah, they let him in with it. So yeah, we would shoot stuff from the stands.
Wow, that's that's cool. And another thing you were kind of living through. I just want to get your take on the Iron Claw, that Von Erich movie, because you lived through. I mean, you were.
Yep.
You were writing the magazines at that time. I remember getting that Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The Boy Who Will Lead Them into the 21st Century. I had that issue, and I remember picking it off the shelf. Tell me about what you thought about the Iron Claw and that whole the Von Erich tragedy / dynasty.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. So I went to see the Iron Claw with Bill Apter and with the Blue Meanie.
Oh, yeah.
So we went to see it. I maybe because I know the story so well, I was disappointed. And if you really want my movie review style review, you can go to IMDb, and I posted I think I gave it 5 stars. You look for C.P. Barnum under the bylines. It was the only time I've posted a lengthy review of a movie on IMDb. I was disappointed they left Chris out. If you're doing a movie about, brotherhood and tragedy, how can you leave a brother and a tragedy out of it? As a writer, as someone, and of writer, lowercase w writer, but I have made my living with words. Since the Reagan administration. So, writing and editing is sort of my thing. And I'm watching the movie, and I wanted to rewrite stuff all over the place. It was sort of annoying to me. The acting was great. The actor, and his name escapes me, but he's fantastic. He's in The Bear. If you've seen that show, he played Kevin.
The one that was Kerry? The one that was
Kerry, rather, yeah. The one that played Kerry?
Yeah, he's a smaller guy, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't look like Kerry. He looked like Marty Jannetty to me. He didn't look like Kerry.
Yeah.
Kevin...
Jeremy Allen White.
Yes, Jeremy Allen White, who's fantastic in The Bear. What a great series. And Kevin looked like Pete Rose to me. So, those kind of things were a little disturbing.
The guy who played Fritz was good, though.
The guy who played Fritz was excellent, and that was actually one of the themes of that. Again, if I put my writer's hat on, I would have made a different movie that would have focused more, I think, on sort of the hard-ass component of Fritz and the very religious element of his wife, and sort of the clash between those two worlds. Because I think... who knows, right? The only ones who really know are, the boys themselves. But my sense of it is that it was really sort of that friction between the religious side of it and the business, got to get out there, that side of it, that really created a lot of tension and friction. And when things got very, very difficult, as they did, when you have this, and I hope I'm not pissing anybody off by saying this sort of stuff, but, one man's opinion, when you have a perspective that says, all right, this world that I'm in is horrible, but there's a better world elsewhere, and I can do something to myself that's going to take me to that better world.
Right.
Well, there's a certain mindset where that makes a whole lot of sense. And I think that sort of view of the family and the tragedies, I would like to see that explored a little more, because my sense of it is that's sort of where it all grew out from. The guy that played Flair, I said, I saw it with Apter and Meanie and a theater full of wrestling fans. It was rented out for an event. People groaned and laughed when Flair was on. The ones playing the Freebirds, Harley Race, they were pretty good. I thought all the wrestling action was very good.
They wrestled like the guy who played Michael Hayes actually wrestled like Michael Hayes.
Yeah, and for a hot second, you can see Lance Von Erich in there.
Yeah.
Don't blink. I think people that don't know the Von Erich story, in real detail, I think the movie plays a lot better with them than it does with me. I'm curious what you guys thought of it.
I loved it. It captured the feeling of the time. But yes, I was living through that, and I was watching all that stuff. I used to watch World Class Wrestling before WWF. It was on 25 in the mornings.
Right.
And people don't realize how big the Von Erichs were. That period had been 83, 84, 85. They were giving chase to the WWF just at they really were. And I remember the article you guys had in a Pro Wrestling Illustrated when they came to the Boston Gardens, and they said Boston appreciates the Von Erichs, and they had a thing. I remember that article too, because I read that, and I remember hearing. I was still too young, but I remember hearing that they were coming to the the Boston Gardens. That was a big deal because they had that type of power. But
it was phenomenal how popular they were. And, one of the things that that sort of disappointed me about the movie. I thought the movie was going to do more with the Parade of Champions. The event where
when Kerry wins the belt.
When Kerry wins in memory of David. Kerry beats Flair for the belt. I thought, to me, that would have been a centerpiece of the movie, the way in Bohemian Rhapsody, Live Aid was a centerpiece for Freddie Mercury.
Right.
Yeah.
And they really just glossed over it because that was just, to me, it was just sort of the height of so much emotion, and it was at the peak of the Von Erichs' popularity. And I was there. I was there with
you.
Bill.
Were there, right? Yeah.
I was. It was like 105 degrees at ringside.
Yeah.
43,000 people in Texas Stadium, and when Kerry took the belt, people were just crying all over the place. The emotion was thick in the air. And, I don't have a problem with the movie taking some liberties with timelines. Like in the movie, it looks like Kerry had the motorcycle accident, right after that.
Yeah.
It was sometime after. Stuff like that doesn't bother me as much. But I thought some themes that the movie could have explored were sort of left unexplored. But again, that's me. One guy's opinion. We all have opinions
that's the curse. That's the curse.
We just stick our finger up the opinion.
Yeah, that's the curse.
Like that British wrestler.
Source material. If you know the source material, left, right, and center,
right?
Civilians can watch something, and they may be next to you, and you're going,
yeah,
and they're like, "Ooh, oh, this is fantastic." And that's what happens, obviously, with me and Cimino, if we're watching a Marvel movie, we're like, hey, this is so good. And it's like, oh, that's it. I'm done. I'm out. What is that? And again, Niall will probably like, I think I can take it. I can take it. No, I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore.
Why is the ancient one a female? No.
Yeah, Steve's right though, but you were right there with them. Like you were right in the heart of that. So obviously somebody.
Bill and I went to their home. I met those guys. I met Fritz. Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
Photographed many a world-class match, and you're right. I mean the heat. Oh man, when the Freebirds versus the Von Erichs, unbelievable. There was nothing like it. Nothing like it.
So emotionally attached to that, everybody was. Yep. We talked about that stuff in school. Like you were all in like grammar school. Did you see the Von Erich? Like that was.
Yeah.
And if you think about it really quickly before we wrap this up, I'll give it to you guys after. Kerry Von Erich, if he didn't have his demons, he could have been the biggest star in pro wrestling history. Yep. But he had the look, he had the skill, he had the charisma. He could have been, and he was so good looking. He was so marketable. Not only could he have been NWA champion, he could have went with Vince. I mean, like he could have been that. He was he was so like
He could have
Greek
crossed
god.
over the way The Rock crossed over into film. Yeah.
He just did not have it up here, and he had so many demons with, as people know on record, his drug problems were crazy. But he was also kind of aloof. He just did not have that mind. But if he had like let's say The Rock's mindset or like a Hulk Hogan's mind, because they knew it. He just had it all, and it's just sad that like when you see his life, he was always kind of the follower of the brothers, obviously being in the shadow of Fritz, and Fritz was never going to let him go. Fritz was never going to let his sons go. He needed them in Texas over there, but literally Kerry Von Erich, I think, is the biggest what if in wrestling, because if you think of the time he came up in those mid 80s, like he just could have done modeling. I mean, like he was just so.
I mean, and he was huge. Now,
but beautifully huge.
Did he team up with the Ultimate Warrior?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, I remember seeing it. I remember looking at them together, and I didn't know who that guy was. And I was like,
the Texas Tornado.
It's because when Ultimate Warrior was in World Class as Dingo Warrior, they became friends there. He was friends with the Warrior. Right. So, okay, now, in wrapping this up, what do we have to say to Mr. Craig Peters?
All right, one thing I wanted to ask was, all right, we've got a time machine for you. You can go back to one point in your 15-year career. If there was one day that you could say, I want to relive that again, what would it be?
Wow.
Ooh, that's a great question. Maybe it would be one of those trips. Might be one of those trips to, I don't know. Maybe it would be the Parade of Champions in Texas.
Oh,
seeing that again. That was really something. Or maybe it would be to relive what it was like to be in the David Letterman studio for the Lawler Kaufman thing.
Oh,
that was pretty cool.
That was one of the biggest moments in the ranking of the top 100 things in TV history. That was like in the 20s, wasn't it?
Yeah, when Letterman retired, that was like one of the top 10 clips of all time.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, think about you guys. Bill Apter, that little bald-headed freak, he did so much stuff. He did so much. Oh, I love Bill is the best. But the one thing about Bill, he will never shave his entire head. He'll keep that top bald.
Yes.
Yeah, it's part of his character. I love it. I love you, Bill. You are such a part of history. It's awesome. And vaudeville is great. Steve, any last words from Mr. Peters?
It's been an absolute pleasure. And again,
likewise. Mine entirely.
I am always in awe of people who create something that's going to live forever.
Yeah.
And that magazine, the years and years and years, that's you that's going to be living forever. So years and years later, let's say they do turn it into all digital. Someone in 50 years is going to go there and they're going to go, wow, look at this. Oh, Craig Peters. Oh, you're going to be there. And that was because of all that hard work. So I tip my hat to you. And it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun for me as well. I love traveling down memory lane like this. And like the whole comics and wrestling. And it's great. You guys get it. And I'm sure that the people that are watching this get it too. It's fun. It's pop culture at its best.
And Craig, and from the bottom of my heart, I just really want you to know how many millions of people you truly influenced with these magazines, especially in the neighborhood. I mean, you really captured the map with your covers and with Bill. I mean, those were essentials for us for growing up, and it was great, wholesome fun. It wasn't all this gratuitous stuff. It was just great stuff. And just so you know, I used to make comic books. These guys know about. I used to every month I would make wrestling magazines too. And I would have the pictures, and I would have my own little votings at the end. I made 15 of them, and I used 12 pieces of paper, and I wrote. And I bet you some of my articles even back then were better than a bunch of the guys in those articles that you guys
probably were. I'll tell you one secret. This seems like a good note to close on.
Sure.
as you know, putting my editor hat on and talking to our freelance writers that we had, and even talking amongst ourselves in the office, we would always say, well, we'd say a couple things. One would be like, you're not just working on this month's magazine, you're also working on next month's magazine, because if they don't like this one, they're not going to come back for next month.
Right.
But the real mantra was, have fun writing the story. Just have fun writing it, because if you have fun writing it, the person buying the magazine is going to have fun reading it. And we always, it's great to hear you guys say this sort of stuff, because we really did very consciously keep our readers in mind. And we're going to have fun doing this because we want you to have fun as a reader and come back the next month. And I guess we succeeded a little bit.
you captured the magic. No, seriously, Craig.
It was a great time. It was a great time in my career, and 15 years I'll always treasure.
Oh, and it's an honor to have you here. Like I said, thank you so much. And it's you're magic, man. And I love having wrestling and sometimes a little side shoot stuff. It all has to do with pop culture. It's
yes,
all
it
the
does.
love of, and hey, and for Stanley up there and those guys that influence you, John Buscema and stuff, they got to be laughing too. I mean, I don't know if John Buscema really cared about the pro wrestlers, but he influenced them, and this guy right below put him out there in his own way. Thank you so much. You know how big of a Road Warrior fan you inspired me, and I can't thank you enough for giving me the happiness and the childhood you did. So thank you, man. You and Bill after.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. My pleasure entirely, and I'll see you guys down the road.
Yes.
All right, Steve, take us out of here.
Boom.
Boom.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you soon.